Hey guys, welcome back. Robocraft Early Access coverage. This is episode 67. I'm Enigmius, and today we're continuing with our Tier 10 Armor Core Gunbed. You see, we just put a big-ass thruster on there because maybe a little bit of extra speed won't hurt in some situations, and I felt like it. I don't expect it to be a game changer, but you never know. If you missed the last episode, YouTube was kind of goofing around a little bit with the subscription feeds. We did the universal chassis base here that you could use for any kind of cruiser that you wanted to build. A gunbed, rail cruiser, plasma cruiser, healer cruiser, whatever. You can tailor it to whatever you need. And it's strong as hell because it's armor core, so you know that you're going to get your mileage out of it. Now we're placing the guns, because we've got the pilot seat already. You can see it every once in a while. We swing by there. Again, if you missed the last episode, all we have to do is add guns and whatever else we want in order to fill out the bot, and it'll be combat ready. As usual, we're using the white cubes just to do the layout for the guns. Once we've got the guns where they're going to work, we don't have to worry anymore about collisions. They're all sorted out. Then we can take the cubes out and build all the connections with the armor core methods. It's just a lot easier for the layout to do it with the cubes. So that's what we're doing. I was hoping to get 12 guns on here. We're going to settle at the beginning for 10, just because the guns are so large. If we find that we're losing a lot of head-to-head contests, so to speak, with other bots because they're stripping our guns a little bit too fast, then we can look at reworking the layout and try and get a couple more guns on. But realistically speaking, I think 10 will be pretty good to start. Now, the whole idea here with the gunbed, in case, you missed last episode or you're still not sure, is the benefits of a gunbed is that, first of all, you've got a little bit of gunbrella action protecting you. I know there's anti-gunbrella that kind of allows guns to be stripped easier, but until those guns are stripped, they do have a reasonable armor value that protects your chassis a little bit, and that can't be overlooked. There is a certain amount of protection there until the guns themselves are gone. Plasma and rails will have an easier time removing those guns because of the anti-gunbrella mechanics, but we still have to consider the gunbrella. In addition to that, just the nature of the chassis, it's so simple and straightforward and large. Whether it's done with armor core or done with cubes, you have to chip through a lot of blocks before you can get to the pilot seat, which makes it a very robust bot. And then lastly, because you've got so many guns on the bot that are redundant, you can afford to lose a large number of them, a relatively large number of them, before it impacts your offensive potential. So the most guns that you can have in a working rotation is 6, is one way of putting it. Another way of putting it is, after 6 guns, you aren't getting any increased offensive benefit from having more. The reason why we have the redundant guns is, say for example you have 10 guns, you can now afford to lose 4 of them before it impacts your offensive potential. So the redundant guns means you last longer in a fight, you can keep up the firepower for longer, and really it's just about wearing down your opponents and kind of chewing through them before they can chew through you. So the reason why I was kind of surprised that I hadn't thought of doing a build like this with the armor core methods before is it's kind of ideally suited to the whole armor core concept, is lasting longer than the enemy because of the way that your bot is built. Now the nice thing about the chassis, very easy to just take one block out of the chassis, spin it around, and then all of a sudden you've got a working connection to anywhere on the bot, and that's kind of key. Most importantly, you can do that without significantly reducing the ability of the bot to soak damage. It's not going to cause your bot to suddenly become brittle because you made a connection somewhere. You can make as many connections as you need, realistically speaking, to have a working bot and still have a very strong bot with this chassis. Now, I didn't do anything to cover the tops of the wheels because most of that is going to come from the gun mounts for the top SMGs anyway. After we got the chassis done, just by itself, not maybe the best chassis, it would be easy to kind of chip it apart here and there, but once you add all the gun mounts on and all the connections and all those other things, now you're talking about a lot more blocks that are between your pilot seat and the outside world with all those horrible things that they like to throw at you in matches. So we're just about done with the connections. We just have one more gun to do. At least these are for the top connections. And you can see all it's doing is looking at where we want to go with the connection and then building it down with the prisms until we find a spot. Then we spin a block, so now we've got a side that connects. There you go. Connection is made. Of course, we're not going to leave the connections like this because that would be silly. We want to make sure that the structure that's connecting the guns to the rest of the bot is as strong as we can reasonably make it. short of doing a great big column out of cubes, there's really only a certain number of ways that you can set things up. But for me, it starts with making the initial connection, and then we can build around that connection to protect it. It's basically thinking not in terms of layers like space armor, but just in terms of you've got something that you want to protect on the bot. It's not just the pilot seat, and it's not just the components. We actually want to protect the connections from the components to the rest of the chassis, and that's why you see like this gun mount that's going in now is completely independent of the blocks that are connecting the gun to the chassis. These blocks can basically all be destroyed, and the damage will never be allowed to be transferred to the block that the gun is resting on. So that's kind of the key thing with the gun mounts that I've been doing lately, is making sure that they're separate from the blocks that the gun is sitting on, and then we have this narrow connection that's going back to the chassis that we can widen if we want. But before anyone can get to that connection, they have to go through this pretty robust armored structure to get there. It's the whole idea behind the gun mounts, and it works really well with this system because we don't have to do these huge, massive, bulky gun mounts. We can do, fairly straightforward ones the way that we do, like you can see this one going in here, and it works really well. So the one thing you'll notice is that this gun mount is basically going in sideways relative to the way that we normally do them when we have the connection to the gun facing forward, so that we're still getting that benefit. You can see it's basically touching, you might think, the gun mount, the blocks that the guns are on, but it's not actually connected to the bot yet because it's not coming in contact with anything that would allow it to transfer damage from the connection that the gun is sitting on to the mount. So it's not until we get something else going on in the chassis to connect the gun mount to the rest of the bot that it actually registers as being connected. Now aesthetically, this bot is just going to be a mess, and it's going to be a happy mess. It's not going to be, oh man, that looks so awful. It's going to be very, very busy. There's going to be a lot going on, which there's a bit of benefit in that in terms of people encountering this kind of bot for the first time, wondering what the hell do I shoot at first. Now naturally, it's not an unreasonable conclusion to arrive at shoot at the guns, but in terms of where's the pilot seat, where's the weak spot, where's the best place to shoot at this thing, there's going to be so much going on. It's not going to be an easy decision to make, especially for the railgunners who want to go. When I play a railgun, I know there's benefit to popping the guns off, but I also like the whole idea of like drilling down to the pilot seat, which is kind of easy to do against some bots, but against a bot like this, you're going to have a hard time just seeing where the pilot seat might be, let alone being able to drill right to it. Now this setup here with this gun, because it's so high, it's kind of tricky in terms of what we want to do and how we're going to make it work, because I still want the proper connection to the chassis, and I still want to protect that connection and the block that the gun is sitting on. But if I build this big bulky structure all the way down to the chassis, the base of the chassis, it's going to use up a ton of blocks. And that's where we kind of lose a lot of our CPU, is trying to make these connections from guns that are mounted up high so they don't shoot in the backs of the guns in front of them, and the chassis which is down low. So I'm basically, we've got 3 connections now that are holding this gun into place. Actually, sorry, 1 connection holding it into place and 2 holding the gun mount into place, and then we're building the gun mount around the gun and worrying about that. And by the time everything else is built out, it'll still be pretty tough to get a shot in between all this stuff and destroy the connection that's holding the gun to the chassis. It might be a little bit difficult to see for now, but hopefully when we get into the matches, you'll see that it survives a little bit better than you might think, given that it looks kind of flimsy. But it's not just one connection. It's not like the iStock bots that have these really flimsy single block connections that hold a bunch of individual guns on. Those things are kind of like what I look at with my plasma bot and think easy RP, because it's just so easy to peel all the guns off. This isn't going to be that kind of easy RP. You can see we're building basically like almost like I can't even think of the word right now. I want to say like a battlement around the gun, but that's not the word that I'm looking for. You can see coming down here, we just widen that connection, which is holding the gun mount. Because again, we don't want the gun mount sitting on 2 flimsy connections, or the whole gun mount will be lost, and then the next thing that goes is the gun. So we build that down. Looks a little bit beefier. It is a little bit beefier. It's still the same armor core, transferring damage certain ways. And for now, we're going to call that mount done. Like I say, we don't want to build it all the way down because that's a lot of CPU that we're using. So we move on to the next gun and see what we can do with all of these goodies. It's a very methodical process. If you look at the completed bot as one big thing and say, okay, now I'm going to try and build that, you'll lose your mind. If you look at it as individual components going together in a very methodical way, you're just dealing with small individual systems. It's very, very easy to work with small individual systems. It's not to say that you're going to get it right the first try or get it the way that you want it the first try, but if you're thinking too big, that's when it gets really intimidating and people kind of get lost. Keep it simple. Worry about individual structures, and then once you've done one individual structure, you move on to the next. Before you know it, your bot's done, and you're like, wow, that wasn't so bad at all. Another gun mount going in around. Sometimes I'll pull the guns out of the way because it's just a little bit easier to do all the things that I have to do, and then once everything is done, then I can put the gun back. So if you're wondering where the guns go, there's a method to the madness there. And you can see the nature of the I guess pattern of blocks that I use for a lot of my mounts makes it easy to extend those extra gun mount connections off and down to other areas on the bot. So now we've got the potential for connections to either side, and one in the front, one in the back, holding the mount into place. And then in the process, you can see in this particular case, because the gun's a little bit lower, we can pretty much conceal the entire column of blocks connecting the gun to the rest of the chassis. If we do this 6 more times, the bot will be done. Now, it's worth mentioning, normally speaking, I mean, we've talked before about designing bots for the way we think things should work, and then designing them for the way that they actually work. In a perfect scenario, we're going to be taking all of our damage to the front of the bot. We know from experience that things aren't always perfect. Sometimes you're going to get flanked, you're going to get plasma splash. There's all kinds of weird things that can happen. Bombers make it very difficult to predict where you're going to be receiving the most damage from. But it doesn't hurt to kind of beef up the front of the bot a little bit more than the rest, because, again, you're going to be going out of your way to try and create a scenario where the front of the bot is facing your enemy. So that's something to consider. But it's also helpful if you have a secondary spot on the bot that you can turn the bot to. So if your beefiest section has just been chipped away, you can turn your bot to another beefy section and survive a little bit longer. The Pretty Hate Machine has that on the rear of the bot. There's quite a beefy section of blocks that are connecting everything together. If the front end is taking too much damage, I'll often spin around, and part of the process of tucking tail and running, but even just turning around facing backwards or facing sideways to give them another part of the bot to shoot at that hasn't been chewed to pieces is not a bad idea. So this is something that I'll be keeping in mind with this bot, is once all of the gun mounts are in, and once it's all done, we've got the front that we've gone out of our way to kind of beef up a little bit. Then we want to be able to look at another section of the bot that we can use as our alternate fire receiving zone and beef it out as much as we possibly can. Now, fortunately with this bot, I think CPU is not going to be too much of a limiting factor for us. It's going to be having enough RP to buy the rest of the bots out. Blocks by the rest of the blocks. I was on earlier today trying to get my double RP bonus in Pretty Hate Machine, and after 9 really, really horrible losses, I said to hell with it, but it gave us enough blocks to kind of finish out the basics of this bot, and then we can look at what we have left for CPU and start bulking it out as much as we possibly can once we have the RP to buy the blocks. It's crazy how much you can spend on blocks in Tier 10 and still not have enough for 3 Tier 10 bots, even when 2 of them are almost entirely Tier 9. Actually, that's not true. Panther Bee is almost all Tier 10 now, which hopefully someday we'll have enough CPU to finish. So here again is another example of the gun mount is completely detached from the column that the gun is sitting on. It's completely red because, well, it just changed red because we just made one connection, but this long skinny thing reaching back on an angle, we have to protect that, because if we get hit from the back, that's one block that gets destroyed that peels that whole gun off and everything that between the gun and that block. So we have to be careful about that. But it was just illustrating that, you know, the gun mount in its earliest iteration is completely detached from the rest of the structure. So now we can look at kind of what we've got going on here in terms of protection for that column of blocks, and if we can run something off the back of the gun mount that will work to keep fire from hitting that column of blocks, then that's one way to do it, and then we can bulk it out as we have the opportunity. But in this case, I just kind of set it aside, and then I was doing some messing around. I put some guns on the side and said, okay, we'll just kind of take those off for now. We'll put them back later. And now I've got some extra blocks, and you can see we're building out again. We're adding a little bit to this gun mount up here, one more connection to keep the gun mount in place, and then another connection down here to keep the gun, yeah, that is still the gun mount. So a lot of individual connections holding that gun mount in place, because again, flanking, plasma bombers, stuff like that. Now we can build down and look at protecting that column of blocks that's reaching down from the gun to the chassis. It's not going to be 100%, because again, it would require a lot of blocks, and that's where we lose a lot of CPU. We'll see how it goes. If we're finding that we're getting hit in the back a lot and these guns are getting popped off too easily, then we can make adjustments. But for the time being, we're kind of making that decision between you know, the most blocks possible and the most reasonable protection for what we can afford. There's lots of opportunities here where we can build out the armor on the back end for the bot and protect that column if we have to. We just need the blocks to do it. So right now we're doing the best we can with what we've got, understanding that if it's not good enough, we can always fix it later. So again, just more and more connections. I don't know why I fixated on this turret for connections so much, because there's a lot. We put on a lot. Now you can see we got guns going on. Not necessarily ideal positions for right now. Again, especially over on this side, you'll see we'll have to do some messing around and see what we can do. See what's happening in the matches. If the guns are too low, if they're too high, if they're shooting into the backs of one another. I kind of learned from hard experience with the TX1 SMGs that sometimes it's not good to have guns on the side too close to the ground, because they can actually clip into the ground and impair your ability to move. So that's why I put it on the back, even though that's not necessarily the ideal position to have a gun. Is low in the back, high in the front, just means if you're aiming up, you've got much more chance of shooting into the back of the gun. Let's see, we'll see how it goes. There's so many guns on this thing, it's not like we're too concerned about losing offensive potential. Usually if I'm shooting from the guns on this side, I'll angle my bot just a little bit so that I'm not even firing directly at the backs of any guns if I'm angling up or down. So now I'm literally doing a little bit of scavenging, grabbing blocks from places in the chassis where I don't necessarily need them and placing them somewhere else. What will eventually happen is I'll remember that I have 30 tetras that we can bring to bear, that we can use to bulk things out and make things a little bit beefier, a little bit more protected. And then we'll someday get that double RP win, and we'll be able to buy the rest of the blocks that we need to max out the CPU with this bot. So I'm just going to let you guys watch the rest of this, kind of filling it out. That's really all we're doing at this point, is bulking things out so that they'll survive a little bit longer. You can see, again, protecting this back gun, the column reaching down to the chassis, just by building out around it. Nothing particularly complicated. Next episode, we're going to get into some matches with this guy and see if it's a success right out of the gates, or if we need to make some adjustments. One way or another, it's going to be a great bot. It's just a question of whether it's great now or great later. So if you want to be notified when I add that video and the Panther Bee videos and more strategies and the beginner's guide, you can always subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on social media. Links for social media always in the information section below the video. Please leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.